Right, hi guys. Sorry we have had a bit of a delayed start today. Unfortunately, we had a bit of a power cut about half an hour ago, and it's taken us all this time to sort of get everything up and running. But we are back and we are here, so hopefully you are still with me, and lovely to see you all. If you'd like to download this paper and have it with you, it is in the pinned comment right at the top. You can just go and click that and download this paper. It is here for you to use, and at the end of the live I will upload my version of this, and you can use that to help you with your revision. So I will add my my version with all the notes and with all the annotations and everything as I go along. I'll add them, and you can upload that version. You can download that version to help you with your revision. So hopefully that will help. So let's get cracking. As I said, I'm sorry we're running late today. One of those things. I genuinely think like one day we will have a live where there is nothing going wrong, there's no weird noises, the camera works, the microphone works. One day we'll have that, but you know, not this week. So let's get cracking. So we're going to go through, I wanted to go through a paper 3 that was not Germany, because I think lots and lots of you are having real trouble finding a paper that is not Germany to help you with your revision. So if you are doing Germany, this is fine. You can still find this will still help you, because this is still the same structure. It's still exactly the same. But if you're not doing Germany, you're doing the USA 1954 to 75, I think one of the problems that you get is that you haven't got a lot of revision resources. And I'm hoping that very soon I'm going to be able to start covering some of the lesser covered topics. I want to get through the main covered topics first, but I do want to go through some of the lesser covered topics, because I just think there's not that much out there for you guys. So let's, without any further ado, let's crack on. Let's start having a look at this paper 3. The USA 1954 to 75, conflict at home and abroad. So this is the longer one. This is 1 hour and 30 minutes. I say it's the longer one. I know that paper 2 is longer and that you get 1 hour and 50 minutes, but it is split over 2 papers. So I think actually this is the longer one, because it's the longest one over 1 paper. So you need to have black ink. The reason they say this is because it gets scanned into a computer. And, oh, hang on, let me just focus this up a little bit, Michael Bolton, because that makes it a little bit easier to see. You just do a little bit of focusing, because it's just not that easy to see. There we go, zoom in a bit. That might make it easier. Try that. And then I'll press the focus button again. Hopefully that'll make it a bit better. So it gets scanned into a computer, and then your examiners don't see anything other than just your individual questions. So that's kind of good in a way, because it means that you are completely anonymous when you're getting marked. But it does also mean that you need to make sure that you're writing in black ink, because that way your examiners can see your work very clearly. Right, okay, so, hang on, let me move over. What else do we need to know? There are 52 marks for this paper. There is a SPAG on this paper, but I will say what I always say on SPAG, which is that I don't want you to worry about it, because it's only 4 marks. It's only 4 marks, and generally speaking, you will get 2 or 3 marks depending on how good your question 3D is. So if you get about somewhere between 9 and 12 marks on question 3D, you'll probably get around 3 marks for your spag. If you get 16 marks for your question 3D, you will absolutely get 4 marks for your spag. So it's kind of, and if your writing is completely illegible, you will get 1 mark for spag. It's just that simple. So it's just not worth worrying about. So let's have a look at the questions and see what we've got to do. So question 1. Question 1 is based on a source. It says answer question 1. Then this is section A. Section A has 3 questions in it. Answer question 1, then either question 2A or question 2B. So we have to answer question 1. It says study source A below and then answer question 1. Source A, Philip Caputo was a US Marine who fought in Vietnam in 1965. This is an extract from his memoir about his experiences called A Rumour of War, 1977. So this is from a US Marine. He is writing firsthand and he is writing pretty much as soon as he gets home from the war. So what's he writing about? Let's have a look. He says, the enemy was elusive. He did not fight like a conventional soldier. He moved night and day and hid by night and hid by day. He appeared suddenly and fired a few shots or set off a mine, and then vanished into the jungle or the villages. The villages were filled with old men and women and children, and yet from these same villages our patrols were ambushed. The Viet Cong knew the terrain far better than we did. They chose the time and place of battle. Okay, so we know that this question is going to be about something to do with the Viet Cong methods of war. So let's have a look at what the question is. The question says, give 2 things you can infer from source A about how the Viet Cong fought during the Vietnam War. Complete the table below to explain your answer. So let's have a look. What is an inference? An inference means, and I think this is trickier on a written source than it is on picture source. An inference is when you work something out based on the text. So this doesn't mean that you read it and you say, right, it says here that the enemy was elusive and it says that they were hard to find. That's not a inference, because all that is paraphrasing or rewording what it says. Okay, so you're not doing anything there. That's not actually doing anything particularly clever. What you need to do is you need to take it a step further. So the enemy was elusive. He did not fight like a conventional soldier. Okay, he moved at night and hid by day. Okay, what does that tell us about what their tactics were? Well, their tactics were they didn't fight like the Americans were expecting them to, like hand to hand, day by night, day by day. So they fought like sort of guerrilla tactics. Like they would go in, they would attack, and then they would retreat. Okay, so that's what it's telling us, isn't it? It's not telling us. It's telling us that they had these different tactics. Now, it doesn't say that explicitly. It doesn't say that they used guerrilla tactics. It doesn't say that they were doing these sort of flash attacks. But we can infer that. We can work that out from what was said. And that's what this question is asking you to do. It's asking you to look at what is saying and then take a step further. Okay? So, we're going to have a look and we're going to say, right, okay, so what's the question? The question says, what can I infer? I'm going to say the Viet Cong used hit and run guerrilla tactics rather than fighting directly in open battles. So I've inferred that. I've worked that out from what it was saying. Okay. And then it says details in the source that tell me this. Well, I'm just going to say, okay, well, I can work that out. Literally, all I'm doing is taking a quote from the source. He appeared suddenly, fired a few shots, or set off a mine, and then vanished. That is a direct quote from the source. Look, here it is. He appeared suddenly, fired off a few shots, or set off a mine, and then vanished into the jungle of the villages. That's a direct quote. That's not using my brain at all. I'm just literally copying what it says in the source. Okay, so then I need another one. Okay, so what am I going to say now? Well, I'm going to pick something from this second bit. It says the villages were filled with old men and women and children, and yet from these same villages our patrols were ambushed. Well, okay, so what's he saying here? He's saying that the villages were just full of... there wasn't any men in the villages. That's what he's saying. And he's saying that there was... clearly, though, there were Viet Cong soldiers hidden amongst those old men, the women and the children. Okay? And so somehow it was difficult for the Americans to tell who were Viet Cong and who were civilians. Again, it doesn't say this, but I'm working this out from what it says in the source. So let's go in and have a look. I'm going to say the Viet Cong, let's move that down a bit. The Viet Cong made it difficult for American soldiers to tell who was a fighter and who was a civilian. Again, it doesn't say that in the source. I'm just picking it up from what this guy said. I'm just picking it up. Excuse me. The villages were filled... How do I know this? Because the details in the source that says this. The villages were filled with old men, women and children, and yet from these same villages our patrols were ambushed. Again, I am literally just taking that as a direct quote from the source. I'm not doing anything clever there. Okay, so that's all you have to do for that inference question. Now that trips loads of people up because you're not writing down what it says in the source. You are having to do that little step extra. You literally have to think, okay, I'm not writing down what it says. So you're not saying the villages were filled with old men, women and children. Okay, so you're not saying, oh, it's only old men, women and children living in the village. You're having to say, okay, well, what is this telling you? What is he trying to say here? What's his point? Because he's saying, oh, you know, it's filled with old women and old men, women and children. Well, what's his point? Well, his point is it was really hard to tell who was Viet Cong and who was people. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Please feel free to stick your questions in the chat. I'm on my own today, unfortunately. Victoria's not here. So normally she would be filling in the questions. So I'm a little bit, this is the other reason we're like panicking today, because my beautiful assistant is not here. So we are doing our absolute best, but we will continue. So anyway, we will continue, but she's, so please stick your questions in the chat. I will try to answer them as best I can. But let's move on to the 12 marker. Okay, so nowadays you get a choice of 12 marker, which is amazing, because it used to be that you would get one, and if you struggled with this, you were in trouble because it's 12 marks, and that is a good old chunk of your marks. But nowadays you get a choice of 2, which gives you the best possible chance. So let's have a look. Let's do a little focus up. So we've got a choice of 2. So we've got explain why the US government became more involved in the civil rights movement in the years 1960 to 62, and it says you may use the following in your answer: the sit-in movement and the KKK. You may use information of your own, or explain why opposition to the Vietnam War had a big impact in the USA, and you may use the following in your answer: the 1968 election and divisions in American society. I think both of these have tricky elements, but I think that this top one is a little bit easier because it's got more of the prompts are slightly easier, but I think the bottom one is more broad, and actually the prompts are trickier, but I think the question is broader and therefore has more, makes it actually a slightly easier question. So we're going to have a look at both because I think both have some interesting elements to them. But just always worth pointing out, and I will always say this about 12-mark questions, so watch out. The first prompt is a whole paragraph. Okay, so that's a whole paragraph you're going to write on the sit-in movement. Just as you're going to write a whole paragraph on the 1968 election. Okay. And then the KKK forms part of a paragraph. And it's a clue. In this case, the KKK is a clue to the freedom rides. So it's telling you, why did they get involved? Why did the US government become more involved? The KKK forced them to be involved because they started attacking the freedom rides. Okay, but it's not a whole thing on its own, because the government weren't that interested in the activities of the KKK right up until they started bombing buses. So that's the only time that they became involved. All right, so it's a clue. It's a clue. It's not a whole paragraph on its own. It's just a clue. And then the second one, divisions in American society. Again, it's a clue. What's it a clue to? Well, it's a clue to I can't remember what it's a clue to now. I have to look it up. 1 second. It is a clue to the government having to do things at the protests. That's a good point. It's a clue to the protests. Yeah. So it's a clue. So that's always worth remembering. There is always a pattern to the bullet points, and when we have a look at paper 1 and paper 2, I will tell you all about what those bullet points mean as well. So let's zoom on. We're going to have a look at the first one. Explain why the government became more involved in the civil rights movement in the years 1962 to 62. So this is really important that we stick to just those years. So let's have a look. 60 to 62. What happens in 60 to 62? 60 to 62, we have the sit-ins, we have the freedom rides. What is the other thing that happens in 62? I'm just going to plan this. We have the James Meredith case. What's the James Meredith case? Anyone? I'm not going to put you all on the spot. James Meredith's case is, of course, when he tries to enroll at the University of I can't speak today. University of Mississippi. How do we spell Mississippi? Who knows? Double S, I, double P. It's all the doubles. Okay, so it's always worth. That's a tricky one. It's all the doubles. So that's what my 3 paragraphs are going to be: the sit-in movement, the freedom ride, and the James Meredith case. And we are focused on why the US government became more involved. Okay, so we're not just going to be writing about those. We're going to be writing about why these 3 things led to the government becoming more involved. Okay, so let's go and do that then. We're going to be using point, explain, analyse. Point, evidence, explain, analyse. Why are we going to be doing that? Because it is a level 4 answer. And whenever we do level 4 answers, we are going to be doing level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Okay? Because that explained analysis is going to get us our top marks. Okay, so in order to do our point, evidence, explain, analyse, hopefully this is all making sense, and you're not just thinking, what is this crazy woman on about? And you can't also just hear my dog just chomping on her bone in the background, because she's decided that now is the moment that she wants to be heard. It's always the way. Okay, right, let's make sure you can see this before I start wanging on about it. Right, there we go, line it all up nicely. Okay, so, paragraph 1. This is going to be all about the sit-ins. So, just going to be like one reason the US government became more involved in the civil rights movement was the scale and visibility of the sit-in movement. So I'm saying that the reason that the sit-in movement led to them becoming more involved was because the sit-in movement was so huge and so public. They had no choice. Okay, so beginning in Greensboro in 1960, this is my evidence. Beginning in Greensboro in 1960, students challenged segregated lunch counters through disciplined non-violent protest. Okay, now I need to explain that. Why does that matter? Why does anyone care? Okay, so my little bit of explanation, I just gave it a little bit of evidence. I just explained what the all I've done there is explained what the sit-ins were, basically. So as the movement spread across the South, thousands were arrested, creating national media coverage. So it's getting national media coverage. That exposes the contradiction between American democratic ideals and racial segregation. This increases federal involvement because the Kennedy administration could no longer ignore civil rights as a local issue. So this means that Kennedy has to get involved because he can't just go, oh, it's just a local thing. It's just a non-important thing that we don't have to get involved in. So why then our analysis, and this is the bit that's going to get us our top marks, because we need to get those top marks, is we need to analyse it. How important, how much of a big issue was this? How much does this get the national government involved? Widespread protest made it a national political problem, requiring federal attention and pressure on southern authorities. So it's quite a big problem. It requires federal attention. Okay. Next thing. So with 12 mark questions, there is no need to compare. There is no need to write a conclusion. There's no need to write an introduction. None of that is important. Okay, next one. So in this one, I'm going to talk about the Freedom Riders. I'm going to talk about the KKK. And again, remembering I'm focusing on how those things led to the involvement of the federal government. Okay, so point. Another reason was the violence faced by the Freedom Riders, particularly from the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, so evidence. I'm just going to say, what was the violence faced by the Freedom Riders? So, in 1961, buses were attacked, including the firebomb in Anniston. The brutality was widely reported in the press and damaged America's international reputation during the Cold War. If you're also doing superpowers, you will remember that this becomes a major issue for America because they literally have to sort of back out of a load of other stuff because they're having so many problems in their home politics. Okay, so explanation time. This forced the federal government to send marshals for protection and to pressure the Interstate Commerce Commission to enforce desegregation. So you remember that they've already passed a law saying that desegregation needs to happen, but it's not happening, which is the whole reason why the Freedom Riders are doing it. But it's not happening, so this is why they have to start forcing them to do it. Okay, so that's the explanation. Forces the federal government to go and start enforcing it. Therefore, little analysis, little mini conclusion at the end of my paragraph. Violence therefore directly pushed the government from observation into action. Okay, little mini paragraph. There's my little analysis. Finally, I'm going to talk about the James Meredith case. So James Meredith trying to get enrolled at University of Mississippi. So a further reason was open defiance of federal authority in the James Meredith case in 1962. So, bit of knowledge. When Mississippi's government attempted to block Meredith's enrollment at the University of Mississippi, riots broke out. Why does this mean that the government has to get involved? President Kennedy responded by sending federal troops, demonstrating that the government would intervene to uphold constitutional rights. Mini conclusion at the end of this paragraph. By 1962, resistance at state level made federal involvement unavoidable. There we go. So that's it. That's a 12 marker. You literally just gone point, evidence, explain, analyse. 1 to 2 sentences, tops. Really straightforward. You don't have that long, really. 15 minutes to write this. That's 5 minutes a paragraph. So no one is expecting you to be able to write masses and masses and masses. You just don't have time, truth be told. So all you can do is your best, and all you can do is sort of a sentence per thing. I think, just a reminder by the way, is that I am giving you questions that have never come up before. That's not to say that they will definitely come up, but that is to say that they have never come up before. So it is worth bearing that in mind for your revision, that these are good questions to revise because they have not ever come up before. Okay, let's have a look at the next 12 marker. So this one was, let's just remind ourselves. Let me just get the paper up again. 1 second. So this question was, no, that's the source. You see, I need a secretary or something, or maybe a holiday. Which do we think? I have lost the questions. That's amazing. How am I so clever? I've only got 3 pieces of paper. How have I lost the questions, man? Did I give them to the dog? Here they are. Right. There we go. Okay, so the question was, let's remind ourselves, explain why opposition to the Vietnam War had a big impact in the USA. It's really general, this question. It's so general. A big impact on what? Could be anything. But we're going to sort of I think this gives us a nice general answer. So, you can use the following into your answer. The 1968 election, so that's the whole paragraph. Divisions in American society. We're going to talk about protest. My final answer is going to be about the media and the shift in the way that the media treats the politicians, because obviously things change dramatically in the way that they treat their politicians. So let's zip on and have a quick look at this one. Not going to spend as long on this one, but I just wanted to have a quick look because it is worth spending a bit of time on this. So, one reason for opposition to the Vietnam War, one reason the opposition had the Vietnam War had a big impact on the USA was its effect on the 68 presidential election. So that's my point. I'm just going to quickly, one point. As the war continues, especially after the Tet Offensive, many Americans began to doubt government claims that the victory was near. Television coverage showed heavy casualties and destruction, increasing public distrust. Then we do our little explanation. This opposition weakened President Johnson politically and led him to announce in March 1968 he would not stand for re-election. So opposition to the Vietnam War actually led to the president refusing to run for election again. So that's a pretty major effect. The election was therefore shaped the war, with candidates such as Nixon promising a way, and there's my little mini conclusion, to end American involvement, showing how protest had reshaped national politics. Okay, another reason was the deep divisions the war created within American society. So, who is unhappy? Students, civil rights activists, and many young people joined anti-war demonstrations, while others strongly supported the war effort. Events such as protests at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 1968 revealed violent clashes between demonstrators and police. This created a clear generational and political divide, often described as a conflict between the hawks and the doves. Oh, the Americans love their hawks and their doves. They're all out again, aren't they, at the moment, talking about the hawks and the doves. Hopefully, if you are listening to the news at the moment and you hear them talk about the hawks and the doves, you're like, oh, I know what they are. I know what the hawks and the doves are. Hopefully, that's so this is why we teach you history, so you can go, I know these things. And the war therefore fractured American society and increased social tension across the country. Finally, my final point was about the media coverage, because this changes the media's relationship with the government. Before this, the media are quite respectful of the government, but this is where it kind of changes. So a further reason was the impact of media coverage and shocking revelations such as the My Lai massacre. Reports of American soldiers killing civilians damaged the trust in the government and the military. Don't forget, America is so like, you know, it doesn't matter what the military do, it's fine, but this changes. And this contributed to a wider credibility gap between the official statements and public belief. As a result, we love that phrase, as a result. It's always a great phrase, because it's like, because of all of this, opposition pressured the government to change strategy, leading to Nixon's policy of I'll get my teeth, I'll put them back in, Vietnamization, and a gradual troop withdrawal. The war did not just divide opinion, it forced a shift in policy. So, there we go. There's a 12 marker, two 12 markers. These are available as model answers, or will be by the time I've scanned them into my computer, on my website, which is, I'll put a link in the chat in a minute for you, well, by the end of the thing. There's already a link to it, actually, if you go to the pinned chat, so that you can go and download this one. Right, let's get on with question 3. Question 3 is a whole thing. Let me just zip over to YouTube so I can check that everything is groovy, which it is. It's the 1960s rubbing off on me. We're into the everything is groovy. Do 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 do. Sorry. Right, groove is in the heart. I'm not sorry, actually. Okay, right, so let's look at question 3. Question 3 is a whole question on its own. So you get question 3A, 3B, 3C, and 3D. And questions, and they all build up together. So questions 3A is looking at the sources. Then you get questions 3B and 3C, which are looking at the interpretations, and they are designed to build you all the way up to question 3D. So by the time you get to question 3D, you are so familiar with the interpretations. The question 3D becomes quite easy because you're already like, oh, I know about the interpretations. The question interpretations are easy. So we're going to have a look at the sources, which I have not printed out because I'm a genius. So instead, I'm going to put them on my screen. So let me just do a little bit of scrolling on my computer. 1 second. There we go. Is there a way of making this full screen? I don't know. Let me find out. You see? This is genius. I'm going to sing for you again now. You'll enjoy that. Right, okay, so I'll share my screen with you and then we'll have a look at the sources. So, scene, window capture, I think that's it. Nope. That one? Yeah, there we go. Do you want me to sing for you again? Probably not. I'll sing Grieving in the Heart again, and then I'll just go and grab the printing. 1 second. It's like having an actual teacher, but like a disorganised teacher, right? One of those ones that just runs off and goes and gets your printing halfway through your lesson. You know the ones. I was like that when I was a teacher. Ah, dear. Right, be right back, 2 seconds. Okay, sorry about that. Well, let's try again then. This time with the actual sources in front of us, eh? So, okay, so let's have a look at this source then. So, as I said, Coretta Scott King was Martin Luther King's wife. The question we're going to be answering is about, let's have a look, the importance of the leadership of Martin Luther King in the development of the civil rights movement in the 1950s. Now, there has been a similar question to this in the past, but it was not focused on the civil rights movement in the 1950s. So this is more about how important Martin Luther King was to the development of the civil rights movement. So there was one a few years back that was about how important Martin Luther King was to the civil rights movement as a whole. But this one is about how important Martin Luther King was to the development of the civil rights movement in the beginning. So I think it's a slightly different question, and there hasn't been that much in terms of questions about the early years of the civil rights movement for Martin Luther King. So I think it's a good question for us to ask. So, focusing on that, this question, let's have a look at this source. I can just move my camera a little bit so we can get up a little bit. There we go. So, this question, what is it saying? What is this source saying about the role of Martin Luther King Jr. into in the civil rights, in developing the civil rights movement in the early years, in the 1950s. So it says, he was thrust into leadership during the Montgomery bus boycott, but he never sought fame or position. He accepted the role because he believed that nonviolent resistance was the most powerful weapon available to oppressed people. His calm determination helped to sustain the boycott during the months of intimidation and fear. So that's saying that he helped to sustain the boycott. Okay, that's really important. Then, under his guidance, the protest remained disciplined and rooted in Christian principles. So saying that it was his guidance that helped it to remain disciplined. He was the one that kept it focused. And it was his leadership that transformed a local protest into a movement that captured national attention. So she's saying he is the one that sustained the boycott. He is the one that kept it disciplined. He is the one that made it a national movement. Okay, so there's 3 key things there. So let's have a look at that one source. Now, we don't have to compare sources. We don't have to write about them separately. So we are going to, because we don't have to write about them separately, we're going to just jump straight in and write about source B on its own. So, what have I said about source B? I have said source B is useful. I'm going to use COP, just for 1 second. I use COP to answer these questions. like the source police, because it's content, own knowledge, and provenance. Provenance. I'm really struggling today, guys, because this means that we talk about what is in the source, or what the source shows, depending on whether it's a picture or not. It then means that we then back it up with a bit of knowledge, stuff that we know, which is a key point for the source. And then finally, we talk one sentence, literally one sentence. It doesn't need to be masses, commenting on how the provenance affects its usefulness. So we are always talking about usefulness, because the source is, the question is, how useful? We're not talking about anything else. We're not talking about like, oh, I think it's a really nice, interesting source. We're not, I don't care. Don't care if it's interesting. It's useful. Is it useful as a historian doing historical research into how important Martin Luther King's leadership was into the development of the civil rights movement? Is this source going to help me do that research? Yep. So, is this source going to help me do this research? Well, yeah, it is, because it's Martin Luther King's wife, right? So, source B is useful because its content presents Martin Luther King's leadership as central to the success of the Montgomery bus boycott. Okay? Cool. It helps me do a little bit of research into Martin Luther King's role in the Montgomery bus boycott. It suggests that his calm determination and commitment to non-violence helped guide the protest and turn it into something bigger than a local campaign. It's just what it says in the source, guys. That's all it says. I'm not doing something amazingly intellectual here. I'm just saying what it says in the source. That's all it says in the source. Okay? This supports the argument that King was important in shaping the direction of the movement in the 1950s. There you go. That's all I've done, is I've just said what it says in the source. That is the content. Okay, that's the content. Just say this is what it says in the source. There you go, nothing intellectual. Then I'm just going to back it up with something I know. So my own knowledge agrees with this. So we do know stuff that agrees with this. We know that King was important because he had later helped to set up the SCLC in 1957, giving civil rights protests a stronger organisation across the South. So we know that he went on to do more organisation. He went on to do more stuff. So we know he's a really important organiser. That's it. One sentence of knowledge. That was it. Own knowledge. Tick. Yeah. Then we need to do one sentence of provenance, just to show we've thought about it, because that's all we need to do. Again, you haven't got long for this. You've got maybe 10 minutes. So that's maybe 4 or 5 minutes per paragraph. You haven't got long. So no one's going to be like, well, you didn't write enough about that. You haven't got enough time. So, however, the provenance is important. It's going to affect it, okay? So she's saying, oh, he was great. He did all these things. He was incredible. Yeah, she's his wife, okay? Obviously, she thought he was amazing. She married him, yeah? So, however, the provenance is important. Coretta Scott King was his wife and wrote, like, literally a few weeks after his death. So she might emphasise his role and present him in a positive way. No way. Obviously, she did that. Okay? Yeah. So that's going to be a little bit of provenance that's important. In fact, if anything, I've downplayed how much she's going to be like, oh yeah, he was amazing. Obviously, he was amazing. He's your husband. Okay, so let's have a look at the second source. How are we doing for time, guys? I know we're running late. We are going to overrun today. If you guys are good for sticking around, we're going to have a look at the source, and then maybe we'll stick around and go into source C. Right, source C. So this is Ella Baker, who is another really important civil rights campaigner. If you don't know who she is, I strongly recommend you go away and look her up. She's amazing. So, in April 1960, Ella Baker spoke at Shaw University in North Carolina at a meeting which led to the creation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That's a mouthful, isn't it? She said, "The movement made Martin, not Martin the movement." I love that. The Montgomery bus boycott was not the work of one man, but of thousands of black men and women who refused to ride the buses. Strong people do not need strong leaders. They need strong organisations. The real power lies in the hands of ordinary people. Oh, excuse me. Oh, it's time for bed. Who are prepared to act together. Charismatic leaders can inspire, but lasting change depends on organised communities willing to challenge injustices themselves. So, who does she say, or what does she say about Martin Luther King's involvement? The movement made Martin, not Martin the movement. So what's she saying? She's saying that without the movement, Martin wouldn't have existed. So she's saying that the movement made Martin. He needed the movement. And the Montgomery bus boycott was not the work of one man. In other words, it needed all the people who worked really hard to try and make it happen. The real power lies in the hands of ordinary people who are prepared to act together. I think Martin Luther King is incredible and inspirational, but I just think this speech is absolutely inspirational. Charismatic leadership can inspire, but lasting change depends on organised communities willing to challenge injustice themselves. I think it's a message for today as much as a message for the past. Just incredible. But never mind inspiring us all to go out on the streets and protest. So what's she saying about Martin Luther King? She is saying that actually it's not the work of one man, that the Montgomery bus protest and by default all the the movement of the 1950s was the act of lots of people of the all the people who worked together. So excuse me 1 minute. Yeah, all right. Go get your toy, Missy. Excuse me, my dog is called Missy, and she hates the dog that lives upstairs. So whenever the dog that lives upstairs comes downstairs, she has to have a little bark at him. We don't know why. They've got like a proper vendetta going with each other. Missy, where's your toy? Yeah, okay. Just for the record, she's like a tiny spaniel. She thinks she's really hard. Right, okay. Anyway, there you are, little saga of my dog. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying this saga of my dog. If you do, put it in the chat. If you like it very much, I'll put it in the chat and I'll share a picture of her. Okay, so let's okay, so let's have a look at my answer about what I think about source C. Source C is also useful, just for the record. All sources are useful because they're not going to give you a source that isn't, just for the record. So they're always useful. So don't ever say, oh, it's not useful, because it is. It's always useful. Source C is also useful because its content argues that the movement depended on ordinary people rather than one leader. Ella Baker suggests that strong communities and not strong leaders were the key to success. And this challenges the idea that King alone was the key to success. So there's our content. Literally, we're not doing anything intellectual. We are just writing down what it says in the source because we don't need to do anything intellectual. We're just writing down what it says in the source. Now our own knowledge. My own knowledge supports this as local activists and groups like the Women's Political Council, who'll get you with your remembering things, had organised protests before King became famous. You could have also said the NAACP and other organisations like that. Just remembering other organisations that existed before King there would have been sweet. So, what else? In terms of provenance, let's find another colour. Oh, look, see all my highlighters. In terms of provenance, Baker was a civil rights activist who believed strongly in grassroots leadership, which may explain why she downplays King's importance. So, just a little aside there, that she was very she thought that grassroots were important. She gives lots and lots of speeches. One sec, I'll come back to that. She gives lots and lots of speeches about kind of like the importance of women and the importance of like working class people in changing things. So she's a very interesting person. Definitely, if you don't know who she is, go and look her up, because she's an amazing person. Will I ever finish the Cold War series? I absolutely will. I got really, really sick over Christmas, like really sick, unfortunately. And therefore kind of ground to a halt. But I have now recorded all the audio, which is really nice. So the plan is that now the audio is all recorded. All I've got to do is animate it. I got kind of distracted because I've had a lot going on. I've been quite poorly, but the dog's back, so we've got to get really upset. But we will. Can we not? Thank you so much. Absolutely, my plan is to finish. I've only got like 3 videos left, so I absolutely will finish it in the next few weeks. Now I'm kind of back on form. I'm gonna make my my beautiful assistant Victoria give me a kick up the bottom and get it all done. Okay, so let's go on and have a look at interpretation. I want to get this finished today because I feel like some of you have got mocks and stuff. Now you're going back after half term, and I want to get this finished because I want to help you guys with your mocks. Right, let's go interpretation 1. The next 2 questions are really short, so let's do this. Interpretation 1 and interpretation 2. So we're looking at the same thing. So like I said to you, question 3A, 3B, 3C and 3D are on the same topic. So we are still looking at the importance of leadership of Martin Luther King in the development of the civil rights movement in the 1950s, because that is always a question that we are looking at now. But now we're looking at historians' view. So we looked at the 2 sources, people at the time, what they thought. One thought, yes, he was great, he was everything. The other one thought, no, he was important, but there were other people who were important. Let's now have a look at some historians and see what they think. So the Montgomery book, this is from The Passing of the Waters, America in the King Years. So it's named after Martin Luther King. That might give us a clue. 1954 to 63. So it doesn't go all the way up to his death, by a historian called Taylor Branch in 1988. So let's see what this person has got to say. I'm not actually sure whether that's a man or a woman, but we will call them just to be on the safe side. Montgomery bus boycott began as a local protest, but Martin Luther King's leadership transformed it. There's a nice clue. Martin Luther King's leadership transformed it. Though young and relatively unknown, King possessed the oratorial power. What do we think they mean by that? They just mean that he was good at speaking. And he had a moral conviction that unified the movement. His insistence on non-violence gave the boycott discipline during arrests. So insistence on non-violence gave the boycott discipline during arrests and intimidation. While local activists had prepared the ground, it was King who articulated the protest as a moral and constitutional struggle. So in doing so, he might have attracted national attention and legitimacy. Without King's leadership, the boycott might have remained a local dispute rather than a turning point in the civil rights movement. So this person, Taylor Branch, is very positive. They think Martin Luther King's leadership transformed it, that King possessed an oratorial power. In other words, that he could speak and convince people to follow him, which is absolutely true, right? We absolutely know this to be true. Okay, so let's have a look at Ella Baker, we would expect Barbara Ransby, we would expect her to be saying something very separate. So she wrote about Ella Baker and the Black Freedom Movement. So we would expect her to be having a very opposite view. She says, so this is a book about, again, the Black Freedom Movement. She says, the Montgomery boycott was not created by Martin Luther King, nor did it depend solely on his leadership. Long before King emerged as a spokesperson, local activists, particularly women such as Joanne Robinson and members of the Women's Political Council, had organised resistance to bus segregation. So she's saying there was already resistance to bus segregation, which we know this is true, right? We know this was happening. We know that there were people protesting the bus segregation beforehand. We know that Rosa Parks was not the first woman to refuse to give up her seat. Yeah. The boycott succeeded because thousands of ordinary black citizens sustained it. Daily, often at great personal risk. While King became its most visible figure, the movement's strength lay in grassroots organisation and collective action. The protest was the product of community networks rather than the work of a single leader. So that's pretty straightforward. We can easily see that there is a link between interpretation 1 and source B and interpretation 2 and source C. Okay, so let's have a look at what question 3B is asking us. Really straightforward, this one. So it says, study interpretations 1 and 2. They give different views about the importance of the leadership of Martin Luther King in the development of the civil rights movement in the 1950s. What is the main difference between these views? And then it says, explain your answer giving details from both interpretations. So this is a 3-sentence answer. Let me show you what this looks like. So your first one is you identify what the difference is. Well, we've just read them and it's pretty clear what the difference is. Interpretation 1 says that Martin Luther King was the most important element of the, that he transformed the civil rights movement in the 1950s. And that interpretation 2 argues that grassroots activists were the most important. So that's all we're going to say. So the main difference is that interpretation 1 argues that Martin Luther King's leadership was crucial to the success of the movement, while interpretation 2 argues that grassroots activists were more important than one leader. That's it. That's the main difference. It's as simple as that. You just read them and it's pretty clear what the difference is. And then all you have to do, your other 2 sentences, so that's 2 marks. The fact that you've identified that difference is 2 marks. Now, to get the other 2 marks, you need to support that with evidence from the sources. Because it says, give evidence, details from both interpretations. Sorry, the interpretations, not sources. So what you're going to do is you're just going to give 1 sentence about each interpretation. So I'm just going to say, in interpretation 1, Taylor Branch suggests that King's oratorial power gave the boycott unity and helped turn it into a national movement. Okay? And then in interpretation 2, Barbara Ransby emphasises the role of local organisers and argues that the boycott was the result of community action rather than King alone. That's it. 3 sentences. There's a difference. Here's a bit of evidence from interpretation 1. Here's a bit of evidence from interpretation 2. Easy as that. Any questions, stick them in the chat. Otherwise, let's move on. Okay. Now then, there is a couple of really easy answers you can give to this question. So suggest one reason. So this is one reason why interpretations 1 and 2 give different views. Why do they give different views? Okay, so this is really straightforward. And your clue is you may use sources B and C to help you give your answer. Now, I always say that the easiest answer to this is that they have looked at different sources. But today I'm going to give you a slightly different answer just to show you that there isn't another really easy answer. So the one I always say is to say that they have looked at different sources. So for example, interpretation 1 may have looked at more sources like source B because it gives a more positive view of Martin Luther King, whereas interpretation 2 may have looked at more sources like source C because it gives However, there is another really easy answer that you can give, and I wanted to show you this today. So this one, again, it's a 3-sentence answer. You do not need to give more than 3 sentences. Your answer is, here's your 2 marks. One interpretation is, one reason they give different views is because the historians focus on different aspects of the civil rights movement. There you go, 2 marks. They focus on different aspects. For example, Taylor Branch concentrates on national leadership and the public role of Martin Luther King, which leads him to stress King's importance. So he's focused on national leadership and the public role of Martin Luther King. Okay? Whereas, in contrast, Barbara Ransby focuses on grassroots activism and the role of local organisers. So she gives more credit to ordinary people and community networks than to one individual leader. So you can say that they focus on different aspects. They focus on different things. And this applies to anything. If you were talking about Vietnam, you could say they focused on different things. So that's another sort of fixed answer. So you can say they focus on different sources, but you can also say they focus on different things. These are always true answers. It doesn't matter what the question is. Okay, so they're 2 easy answers. Again, if you don't know what to do with those, stick them in the chat. Let's finish with the one that everyone goes, I don't know what to do with this question, but it's so easy. It's a 16 marker, but it's shorter than a 16 marker. And all the work is done for you. So please don't panic about this question because it's so easy. So easy. Okay. Let's have a look at it. So it says, how far do you agree with interpretation 2 about the importance of the leadership of Martin Luther King in the development of the civil rights movement in the 1950s? We've just spent however long of the exam looking at these interpretations and the sources to the point now where we're like so comfortable with the 2 arguments that this is basically written for us at this point. Okay, so by this point you've probably also made up your mind who you mostly agree with. Whether you're like, oh yeah, no, but I think Martin Luther King was like fundamental. I think he was absolutely fundamental. Without Martin Luther King, none of this would have happened. Or your gut feeling is, yeah, no, I mostly agree with Ella Baker. I think that it was, you know, the grassroots people were the most important. Without those people, there was no movement. Whichever one you're coming down on the side of, you've probably made up your mind by now because you've just spent the last 25 minutes looking at these 2 arguments. Either way, by the time you get to this question, you've probably made up your mind. So everything is groovy. Back to singing about Groovies in the Heart again. I'm not going to sing anymore. I might sing at the end, but you can log off by then. Okay, so what do we do? What do we do with this question? Because it says use both interpretations and your knowledge of the historical event. Well, it's just the same as any standard 16 mark question, but we've got the interpretations to help us. There is a slight addition that is not if we want to get 16 out of 16. And that is that we need to talk about tone. It says it in the mark scheme, and it asks us to talk about the tone of the interpretation. So this isn't difficult because you do this in English. You do this in English all the time. It's just transferring it into history. So let's just start with what do we need to do. So we're going to start with this with a sentence or 2 probably one just outlining what our opinion is. Now, as I've just said to you, this is easy because you've already made your mind up. So interpretation 2, let me just remind you, was the one with it said that Ella Baker and the Black Freedom Movement, where we just said that she said that the movement's strength lay in grassroots organisation. So I personally, my personal view is that I largely agree with this, that Martin Luther King was important, but the development of the civil rights movement depended more on grassroots than it did just on one or individual. So that's what I'm going to say. I largely agree with interpretation 2, because although Martin Luther King was an important leader, the development of the civil rights movement in the 1950s depended on grassroots organisations more than other individuals. Now, you might disagree with me. That's absolutely fine. That's what history is all about. History is all about having a bun fight in the common room where we all have a big disagreement about the causes of World War One. It's literally what history is all about. So that's what I'm going to say. Now, it's really important that my argument flows all the way through, that I don't just go, I agree with interpretation 2, and then I talk about interpretation 2, and then I say how much I agree with interpretation 1 halfway down. I'm going to say that I agree with interpretation 2. I'm then going to talk about interpretation 2. And then I'm going to say, talk about interpretation 1. But I'm going to mostly say about why I don't agree with interpretation 1. But let's see how I do that. So I'm going to use point, evidence, explain, analyse again. It's still a level 4 answer. So I'm going to be going for PEEA. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember, if it's a level 4 answer, we have to have that A in there. If it's a level 3 answer, we only need to go to E. So, interpretation 2 presents, because I'm going to talk about tone in my point. Just going to get it over with. It presents a measured and corrective tone, suggesting that the movement was the result of a collective effort rather than personal leadership. Where have I got this from? Because I'm using my English skills. It's quite corrective in that it was not created by Martin Luther King, nor did it depend solely on his leadership. However, it then becomes quite measured. It brings in a lot of evidence. It brings in stuff like evidence such as Joanne Robinson and the Women's Political Council. It then says it weighs up. King became the most visible figure, and it weighs up evidence. So I'm saying it's quite measured. That's its tone. It's corrective and measured. That's my argument, is that it's quite measured and corrective. You can do this. You do this in English all the time, okay? So it's not panicky or scary. You can do this. So I'm going to say it's measured and corrective, suggesting that the movement was the result of collective effort rather than personal leadership. So that's my point. Okay? Don't panic. It's all good. This is all good. If you feel like you can't do that tone and you'd like, I don't think I can do that, skip it. Just skip it. You won't lose that very much. You'll lose like 1 mark. 1 mark, you get 15 out of 16 instead of 16. It's not the end of the world. Just lose it. And just say, interpretation 2 suggests that the movement was a result of collective effort rather than personal leadership. Okay? So please don't feel like, oh, I had to do that and then I messed it up. Just don't do it. But if you feel like, do you know, I'll give it a go, give it a go. It might be the bit that gives you the 16 marks. Okay? So let's have a look at what evidence we've got. So this time, instead of our evidence being our own knowledge to that extent, we're going to be bringing evidence from the interpretation as well as our own evidence. Okay? So let's have a look. Where's the evidence from the interpretation? It says the emphasis on community networks and local activists reflects historical evidence. So here's our historical evidence. The Women's Political Council had already planned action before the Montgomery bus boycott began, and Joanne Robinson organised the leaflet campaign that launched it. So they talk about the Women's Political Council and Joanne Robinson, and all I've done is I've just said, oh, here's what I know about those people. In addition, a little bit of extra knowledge, the NAACP had received legal victories such as the Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, which is before the bus boycott. So, the tone of interpretation 2 challenges great leader narratives, which strengthens its argument by broadening the focus beyond King. So, I've messed up slightly because I haven't done my point evidence explained paragraph properly, but that's okay. So, the tone of interpretation 2 challenges tradition great leadership narratives, which strengthens its argument by broadening the focus beyond King. So, in other words, it's just saying he wasn't a great leader, which strengthens its argument by broadening the focus beyond King. So, in other words, why is this? This is my why. It challenges the traditional great leader narrative. It strengthens its argument by broadening the focus beyond King. It's saying that it wasn't just King. Okay, so let's have a look at interpretation 1. So there you are. That's me agreeing with it. Right, now let's have a look at interpretation 1 and how much I agree with it. So this is much more admiring. It's saying that King was an orator, he had this moral authority, it absolutely loves him. So interpretation 1 is much more admiring. It emphasises his tone and moral authority. It suggests that his leadership transformed the boycott into a national turning point. And there is some validity in this view, because King's commitment to non-violence and the creation of the SCLC in 1957 helped give the movement direction. However, the positive tone risks exaggerating his personal role and underplaying the contribution of local activists who sustained the daily protests. So that's my analysis. I wrote this and now I'm like, where are my things? So that's my explanation, that there being some validity because I'm explaining it, and there's my evidence. There we go. Right, and then I just need a conclusion. Overall, interpretation 2 is more convincing because its balanced tone and focus on collective action is better reflects the historical context of the 1950s, when the movement relied heavily on grassroots organisation as well as leadership. But the key thing I want you to take from this is that you are going to have a consistent tone throughout. You only need to do one paragraph on interpretation 1, one paragraph on interpretation 2. You do not need to do 3 paragraphs or masses and masses and masses. You just need to do one for each. You're going to do a consistent argument throughout. So you're going to sort of say, I agree with interpretation 2, and here is why I disagree with interpretation 1. Or vice versa. Or the other valid thing is to say that I mostly agree with interpretation 2. Here's why I a little bit agree with interpretation 1, but I mostly disagree with it. So you're still talking about it. You're still picking up that it's got some valid points. So like I said, there is some validity in this view, as King's commitment to non-violence helped to give the movement direction. But it's overly positive. I think it's overly positive, and I think it underplays the contribution of local activists. Okay, so that is the whole of paper 3, America and the USA. Hopefully that's given you some clarity. If you are still stuck, please feel free to drop me a message. Feel free to give me any questions in the chat, and I will pick them up in the next few days. Otherwise, I'm going to go and scan all this in, and hopefully this will give you a bit of help. And it was really good to chat, and I will see you next time.